From the National Catholic Register, this is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
In the month of February, the Church prays for the sick in a special way. Pope Francis's monthly prayer intention is for the terminally ill. And next week is World Day of the Sick, which is celebrated annually on the feast day of Our Lady of Lourdes. Journalist Courtney Mares of Catholic News Agency recently returned from a pilgrimage to Lourdes. She joins us now on Register Radio. Then we look to a place where Catholicism is growing by the numbers and growing in its leadership for the Church across the globe. Register Senior Editor Jonathan Leidl brings us a report on the Church in Africa. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency, and your host here on Register Radio. February 11th is the Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes, and that's the day that St. John Paul II saw as a fitting feast day for the whole world to pray for the sick. And in 1992, he established World Day of the Sick as a time of, and this is a quote of him, prayer and sharing, of offering one suffering for the good of the Church, and of reminding everyone to see in his sick brother or sister the face of Christ. So we take that very seriously at the Register, and we'll have all sorts of content that helps to call our attention to those who are in need, who are sick, and help us pray for them, as well as on Lourdes, because it's a wonderful place, a wonderful feast day to pray to Our Lady. And Courtney, as I mentioned, Courtney Mares of Catholic News Agency, who's based in Rome usually, and has reported on the Vatican and the global church for CNA for the last several years, was on a pilgrimage to Lourdes last week. Courtney joins us now. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Jeanette. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's a great topic. I have been to Lourdes myself. It's a beautiful place. That was many, many years ago. I did the baths. I was maybe 19 years old, and I was quite impressed by the whole atmosphere there. Was this your first trip to Lourdes?
No, this was not my first trip to Lourdes, but I was so excited to go back.
Yes, and this was a special opportunity, right? It was a pilgrimage with a bunch of journalists. What was the occasion?
That's right. It was a Catholic journalism conference co-organized by the Vatican's Communication Office for the Feast of St. Francis de Sales, who's the patron saint of journalists. But I know that for many Catholic journalists, myself included, it was a great chance to get away out of the chaos of our daily lives, the chaos of Rome, and to pray and really embrace the silence of this very sacred Marian shrine. And it was so special to be able to pray in the grotto and touch the rock where the Virgin Mary appeared 18 times to little St. Bernadette Soubirous in 1858.
It's beautiful. And what was the conference? What were they feeding the soul there?
There were a number of different topics covered in the conference, but I know for me one of the highlights was we heard from some of our colleagues who live and report in parts of the world where there's persecution of Christians and wars and violence. We heard from a journalist from Nigeria, another working, on the ground as a war correspondent in Ukraine. And it was just a reminder that, while we may report on the persecution of the church kind of from the comfort of our newsrooms, it's an entirely different thing when you're there on the ground. We saw that last week, actually. Some of our colleagues from EWTN were in Turkey when there was a shooting in a Catholic church last Sunday. And it's just a reminder to be praying for, of course, the persecuted church, but also for those who have vocations and who work in Catholic journalism, to be praying for them too.
Absolutely. Yes,
yeah.
Courtney, Pope John Paul's on my mind because I just mentioned him, but Pope Francis actually addressed journalists on January, I think it was on the 24th, right, which is the feast day of St. Francis de Sales, and I believe he thanked journalists for their reporting, not only on the good things the church does, but also on the scandal and the troubled things within the church, so that those things come to light. I think he he has an appreciation for what journalists can do. So I wanted to note that he spoke out to the journalists, but I don't want to spend too much time on that because really we're here to talk about Lourdes and this time that you had there and the many touching stories that come from healings in Lourdes. During your time there, I know you were able to speak to people who are on the ground, who are there helping, volunteers. Lourdes is made up of really a network of volunteers, some who go year after year, people, for example, from the Knights of Malta, who really help out there. But who were you able to speak to get an understanding of just the way that pastoral care works on the ground?
Yeah, the first time I went to Lourdes, I just remember being so touched by seeing all the procession that happens at night, the candlelight procession, and people push, and all of these young people and volunteers pushing, the sick and disabled in wheelchairs in procession to the grotto. And I really came away from that wondering, I wonder how you volunteer at Lourdes. And so that was one of my goals going back this trip, was to track down a couple volunteers and hear from them and interview them. And I spoke for a long time with a couple from Canada who's been volunteering in Lourdes since 2006. They went to volunteer first for 1 week and eventually decided, they eventually came back kind of year after year to volunteer for at least a week at a time, and then recently came to the decision to buy a house and officially retire in Lourdes and just dedicate themselves full time as volunteers, and share in this mission of the shrine. And they shared with me, obviously they encounter people every day from all different parts of the world, and they've met, many people who have experienced healings at Lourdes. But I must say I was the most touched by one story they shared with me was about a man who was given, who had a terminal cancer diagnosis and was given just a few months to live. And when they first encountered him, when he first arrived at Lourdes, he was just saying, I must be healed. I must be healed. I need to be healed. I'm married. I have 2 young kids. Like I can't go. And they encouraged him, like they do with all of the people who come to Lourdes, that an important part of a pilgrimage to the shrine is to make a confession, to kind of experience that inner healing, that spiritual healing, as well as praying at the grotto and the baths. And so this man made his first confession in more than 20 years while he was there. And they said that by the end of his entire pilgrimage experience at Lourdes, they just saw this transformation in him. And he was just praying, instead of, I want to be healed, I want to be healed, he was just praying to the Lord, thy will be done.
Absolutely. So not all of the prayers not all the miracles are physical. Some of them are miracles of the soul, interior healing.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's something that I really took away with. And it's really beautiful how they have this emphasis on confession and spiritual inner healing at the shrine. I feel like whether you're at Mass or talking with a volunteer, talking with a bishop, or at a procession, there's always like this gentle reminder, this gentle invitation to come to confession. It's really, I think, a part of the experience there, which I think a lot of other churches and shrines could follow Lourdes' example, because I think it makes it even more powerful, the experience.
And just to think of that, if during World Day of the Sick, the Pope is calling us, and during this month as we pray for the terminally ill, if our church is calling us to care and be aware of the sick and to care for them, not only with our prayers but in service, I think that's something else to keep in mind, is the reminder of inviting them, if they would be interested, to meet with a priest and to help facilitate those kind of things. It's an important reminder, I think, to us to be able to try to facilitate that as well. Courtney, you speak of miracles, and many miracles do happen in Lourdes. How do they handle those? How do they verify a miracle?
Yeah, that's right. There's been more than 7,000 miraculous recoveries attributed to the
Wow.
intercession of Our Lady of Lourdes at this French shrine. But among those, there's only been 70 officially approved medical miracles. Now, that's because they've really established this really rigorous approval process for establishing medical miracles. And I was able to go visit their bureau of the Lourdes Medical Bureau while I was there, and I recommend anyone who visits the shrine to do so. It's something that, you know, might not be the first on your list of places to visit, but it's a really interesting place. The bureau is headed by a doctor who studied at Harvard, and they're really thorough in going through all the documentation. Anyone who reports a healing immediately while they're at Lourdes is kind of directed to go straight to the bureau and be evaluated by doctors. Um, and in the bureau, they actually have on one level a museum that's kind of set up, just kind of a one-room museum, but it goes through and it tells the story of each of the 70 approved miracles that happened at Lourdes. And I was really struck by the most recent healing took place in 2008, and it was of a religious sister who happened to be named Sister Bernadette, and she had a disorder of the nerves and lower spine that caused total paralysis, and she arrived in a wheelchair. And she was cured after she joined a procession in Lourdes. And I mean, that was in 2008. It was really
Wow.
recently.
Wow.
But just to show you how thorough the medical board was, her miracle wasn't approved until 2018. So it was like a 10-year process to get that approved.
I love
Um,
when the Lord uses science, right, to help witness to faith, because faith and science, go together. And this is just an example of that. So I look forward to reading your story on that. I know we'll be rolling out stories at Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register online this week as we prepare for this World Day of the Sick and the Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes. You did have an important interview, and I do want to touch on that. This will be a part of your stories. And that is an interview with the Bishop of Lourdes. And you spoke about a topic that's a little rough, and that is that in Lourdes there is a Rupnik art. Father Rupnik has been accused of abuse, and many people want his art removed. How did the bishop respond to questions regarding that?
yeah, that was, as a journalist going to Lourdes, I just couldn't help but notice, approaching the shrine, Rupnik's mosaics on the lower basilica, they kind of stand out in contrast with the original basilica that was asked for by the Virgin Mary, this neo-Gothic stone basilica with tall stars. They have this bright gold mosaics by Rupnik kind of interspersed on the facade of the lower church. And so that was one of the things I really wanted to ask the bishop about when we were there, because a lot of people in the church are talking about it right now and what to do with this art that adorns, more than, I think, 200 different churches and shrines and liturgical spaces throughout the world. And I must say, when I interviewed him, it was clear that he's taking this decision very seriously. Last year, he formed a commission to decide the future of the Lourdes mosaics and kind of publicly came out saying he was doing this. And he told me how since then, and nearly the year that's followed, he's met with abuse victims. He's heard their stories. He's consulted with experts in sacred art. And he said he prays about this decision every single day. And it's something that weighs on his heart, and that he plans to make a decision about whether to remove Rupnik's art or whether it will remain by next spring. Interestingly, the bishop told me that he has received stacks and stacks and stacks of letters, most of them very angry letters about Rupnik's art, after he announced he was making this commission. So,
Yes,
but one of
it's a
oh, sorry.
it's a I'm sorry. Yes, it's a difficult topic, and I'm really glad that you were able to ask that question, and I look forward to reading what you have to, what else he had to say, because I know the interview was long. He will be appearing on Vaticano, which is our EWTN show airing on Sunday. That would be the 11th, February 11th, and it is an interview with Jean-Marc Mikas, who is the Bishop of Lourdes. Courtney, I am out of time, and I could talk about Lourdes forever.
Yeah, same
but
here.
let's close with an invocation of Our Lady of Lourdes to pray for us. Thank you for joining me, Courtney.
Thank you.
When we come back, we take a look at a church that's thriving and having an impact across the globe. That's going to be a conversation with Jonathan Leidl, who joins us to talk about the church in Africa. This is Register Radio and EWTN. Stay tuned for more.
If you need your news on the go, read the Register online. But if you want to take your time and savor the stories, then subscribe to the National Catholic Register's print edition. And with award-winning Catholic journalism that goes beyond what you'll find from any secular news service, you'll get the real story behind the events that unfold over the course of the year. Try the Register for free today and get it delivered to your home, office, or parish. Join the Catholics who depend on the Register for its faithful and courageous reporting. Get 6 issues free today online at ncregister.com/radio or call 800-421-3230 and mention code radio. That's ncregister.com/radio or call 800-421-3230 and mention code radio. The National Catholic Register. Read faithfully.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency, your host of Register Radio. You know, we often hear sad news of parishes closing or consolidating, and we hear of the rise of nuns, and I don't mean N-U-N-S, but rather those who were formerly practicing a religion but no longer practice. But there is a church that's growing and showing no signs of a lack of faith, and that's the church in Africa. And here to talk to us about the rise of the church in Africa is Jonathan Leidl. Welcome back to Register Radio, Jonathan.
Great to be with you, Jeanette.
So let's talk first about these numbers, because there is a story that kind of shows the growth in terms of the numbers of Catholics. So what do we have in Africa?
Well, maybe let's start off over 100 years ago. In 1910, the entire continent of Africa had fewer than 1 million Catholics on it. And most of those people weren't native Africans. They were European settlers. So fast forward 100 years. So from under 1 million to now, 2024, there are over 265 million Catholics on the continent of Africa. And that accounts for a full 19% of all of the world's Catholics. So 1 out of every 5 Catholic in the world is from Africa. So a pretty incredible story of the growth, the spread of Catholicism on the continent of Africa. And then if we keep looking at it, right, we look at where those numbers are headed, right, we see that by 2050, a full 32% of the world's Catholics are expected to be living in Africa. So 1 out of every 3. In just 35 years, 1 out of every 3 Catholics is expected to be living in the continent of Africa. So an incredible story of just the vibrancy, the dynamism of the faith, not just in terms of, people baptized and identifying as Catholic, but in some countries like Nigeria, 94% of the Catholic population goes to Mass every Sunday, right?
It's beautiful.
And I think in the U.S., what are we down to? Under 15 post-COVID. So just a remarkable story of the African people's embrace of Catholicism.
Absolutely, and it's set to surpass the Catholic population of Europe, which was just a haven of Catholics, and so this is really something to watch, something to understand. You have written an article for the Register. It's in the upcoming February 11th print edition, a very nice layout and very with all sorts of graphics. But it did appear online this week. And one of the titles, because we've kind of tagged it with a few different titles, is "The Congo Flows into the Tiber," and it's about the Catholic Church in Africa's influence is growing, but is Vatican leadership ready for it? There's so much to talk about related to this title. I want to know about the Congo flowing into the Tiber. That's an interesting title. But I also want to recognize that Pope Francis has been a pope of the peripheries. He's visited Africa a bunch. We can talk about how many times, but we also can recognize that Pope John Paul and Benedict visited Africa too. So it's been a part of the Pope's interest and awareness for a long time, this growth in Africa. What are the numbers there? How many times have our popes paid attention with a papal visit to Africa?
Well, you're right. Pope Francis, during his just over 10 years of being Pope, he's visited 10 times, 10 different countries,
Wow.
so about one every year. Pope Benedict XVI, during his pontificate, 2005 to 2013, 3 countries that he visited. But really, when we get to, in terms of papal outreach to Africa, John Paul II, he visited Africa 45 different times. So a total of 40 countries, some of them like Kenya and Cameroon, multiple times. But that's 40 countries out of the 53 nations in Africa. So John Paul II nearly went to every in Africa. You talk about impact, you talk about someone recognizing the importance of the Catholic Church in Africa, not just in the future, but also now. John Paul II and really all the popes clearly aware of this reality.
And maybe those visits from John Paul II, this is something we might want to explore, really had an influence on helping that explosion of Catholics in evangelization, because we do know that a Pope's visit can really have a tremendous impact. So we might go there some other day. But,
yes,
but
absolutely.
This question came up for us recently. I mean, we've been watching Pope Francis's engagement with Africa for a while, but this question came up recently because of tensions between Africa and the Vatican, and these tensions were over Fiducia Supplicans, which is the document that basically authorized that same-sex blessings could happen, that the priest could bless a couple who was in an irregular relationship. What has happened with Africa? They spoke out very forcefully. Then there was some attempt at resolution. But where are we now? What's the story?
Yeah, so this was December 18th when the Vatican released that document. And the reaction from Africa was swift, it was strong, it was public. Over 20 Episcopal conferences of African countries have responded publicly, most of them striking the tone of saying that we appreciate this document of the Pope. We've looked at our situation. We're not going to be allowing blessings of same-sex couples in Africa. It would create scandal. It would, the document's too confusing. It would undermine, this is the interesting part, Jeanette. I talked to a lot of people in Africa. There wasn't a concern that people in Africa, based off this document, would necessarily come to a false understanding of sexuality and marriage. Instead, the concern was that because in Africa, across the board, whether you're a Christian or another Christian, a Catholic, a Muslim, or you practice a traditional African religion, everyone is on agreement that sexuality is between men and women, right? That's what marriage is, and so the problem is that this would have created an enormous crisis of confidence in the church, in the church's authority, actually. So the African bishops, they responded strongly, they responded swiftly. That prompted the Vatican actually to issue a super rare clarification on this document, emphasizing that yes, bishops they can prudentially apply this in their own diocese, so clearly thinking of the African context. And then in a really remarkable situation, Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo, who's from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kinshasa, he is also the head of kind of the the group over all of the bishops of Africa. He flew to the Vatican, requested a meeting with Pope Francis. The Pope met with him. The Pope, Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo, said was sorry about what had happened. And then Cardinal Fernandez, who's the head of the Vatican's doctrine office, he sat down with Cardinal Ambongo at a computer, and they typed out this 5-page, I think the initial version was 7-page actually, statement of the bishops of Africa in regards to fiducia supplicans, in which they said this can't be applied on our continent. So just an incredible back and forth, a lot of tension, and I think it definitely has things to tell us about Africa's influence.
Absolutely, and we do know that the Pope kind of said, okay, we understand that you can't you can't implement this in Africa, and we're okay with this, but it doesn't really seem to be resolved, because the Pope is still saying that there's really a small fringe group, basically, that has put up resistance to fiducia supplicans. But it's not a fringe group, it's a continent. And there are others across the world, too. And it's not over culture, it's over doctrine. So what's next for this?
Yeah, well, what's next is, I think, who knows if the Vatican was completely oblivious to what the reaction from Africa would be, or if they just said, we want to do this and we know that we're going to face pushback. There was no consultation ahead of time, right? Very minimal consultation. So I think this might be a wake-up call for Vatican leadership. I think for so long, Africa has been like the little brother of the church, in the sense that the church there was young, it was maturing. I mean, 50 years ago, most of the bishops in Africa weren't even native Africans, right? They were missionaries from Europe or from other places. So this is the people I talked to, including a Dominican theologian from Nigeria, Father Anthony Okunwale. He said, the future is now. Right? Like, Africa's future is now. Africa has come into its own. It's like, it's found its voice as a member of the universal church. And I think it's the Catholics of Africa, the Catholic leaders of Africa, they're not afraid to speak up, right? They're not afraid to contribute to and impact the dynamics and conversations in the wider church. We know in previous synods, for instance, in 2015, the Synod of the Family, and then also at this recent synod on synodality, we know that African bishops participating have gone in saying, we need to stand up for orthodoxy, really, especially on issues of sexual morality. We know in certain European countries that sort of post-Christian secular ideas are taking hold. And so African bishops have played that role. But this was a kind of like public significant step forward, I think, in terms of Africa's impact. So I think going forward, there's no doubt that the church will need to take into account what Catholics in Africa believe and what their concerns are. And yeah, that line, the Congo flows into the Tiber, I borrowed it from someone, and they're quoted in the article, but it used to be the Rhine flows into the Tiber, right? Germany had this incredible influence on the Vatican, but now we're recognizing that maybe that influence might be shifting to the south, to the continent of Africa.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating, and I think we all have a lot to learn about what we can learn from Africa, and we may find how much commonality there is, especially on the desire to preserve family, the desire to be vibrant in our parish life. And so I encourage our listeners to go to ncregister.com, find this story, The Congo Flows into the Tiber, read it, and let's learn together. Jonathan, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, to check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com. Thanks for joining us on Register Radio here on EWTN. For myself and for my producer, Michael McCall, I pray that until next week, God bless you.